type of Coke.
Hello and welcome to the That's So Craven podcast. Apologies for the delay. We've had some technical issues, and let me tell you, trying to organize, I know we don't have them now, but trying to organize something between North America, Europe, and Australia is a logistical Herculean feat. So we've kind of made it happen. I'm your host, Mark. I've been given the glory of sort of leading the charge here, but I'm going to be curiously beige this time because we have a bit of a debate, a bit of discussion. I want it to be Oxford Styles, but I was vetoed by one of the panelists here. I won't mention him, but he is deceptively tall and has great hair. But anyway, first and foremost, I am joined by an individual from the land of the brave, the home of the free, coming from across the pond. We got Fulham Boston, aka Mike. How are you, Mike?
I'm good, Mark. I'm good. Although I'm not sure anyone has ever been that curious about the color beige in anything. So I'm not sure if that's like something that's really of interest to the crowd.
Very true, but like I said, I'll be taking a back seat. It's all about you guys, and we're gonna hopefully have some fiery debates, some shots across the bow from both sides, the battle of the pond. And to help me out with that, I also have the charming, the indisputable, the Putney perspective, Skibby. How are you, Skibbs?
I'm very well. I'm very well. I was really confused at first because you were saying about the land of the brave and the home of the free, and I was like, I didn't know Essex was the land of the brave, but there you go. Yeah, I'm good to. It's good to be here. It's an international break. It's normally a break from Fulham, but given everything that's going on, there is no such thing as a break from Fulham. They've been still ruining my life, even when we're not playing. So here we are. Happy days.
The fun never stops with Fulham, does it? It's just
Hell
I,
yeah.
I wouldn't mind some good news every now and then. But you know, we're here to talk it out. We're here to somewhat be therapeutic and have every opinion voiced because there are quite a few opinions coming across. We did a Discord poll. Just a quick plug for the Discord because it always has to be there. Great place to meet like-minded Fulham fans, engage in some bants, some memes, maybe get in a polite argument or two. See how many red cards you get, or laughing emojis, or Tom Kearney thumbs up. So that's always good. But we had a poll there. Not a huge amount of turnout, but enough. We had I think low 20s. And the curious thing about the poll was when I asked the question to the group, because I wanted to get everyone's opinion, because we're a democracy, sort of, whether we should extend Silva's contract, whether we should can it, or whether we should sit on the fence until the end of the season and then see what we're gonna do. It was relatively evenly split. I believe the fence vote was about 40% of it, but the other 60% was split right down the middle between people saying give him a new contract now and those saying we need to get rid now because we don't like his attitude, we don't like the way he's playing. It just hasn't worked out since the beginning of the season. Now, I think it would be excellent to have both sides represented in discussion, which is why I got these two lovely gentlemen with me. So let's start off with Mike. Mike, what's your take? Are you Silva in or out, and why?
Yeah, I mean, as an American, this is something that's near and dear to my heart as a democracy-ish. I'm very much Silva in, but more importantly, I am anti-skibby stuffing ballots. I am very, very anti-skibby. I think we need better monitoring at the ballots. I think we need to make sure that very specifically we are watching how many times Skibby votes in each of those polls and block him to one vote. I'm very, very passionate about this because Marco deserves to be backed, not just by the board, but by all of us, and we can't have Skibby undermining our votes.
That's a very fair point. Would you like to expand on? Well, I'm going to give Skibby a chance to rebut that character assassination. But let's talk a little bit more about why Marco wins. Some people have mentioned history. People have mentioned style of play. There's probably other points you want to bring in there as well. But what are your thoughts on that, Mike? Why should
Yeah,
Silva
I
stay
think
in
there's kind of
despite a horrendous start?
I think there's kind of two sides to this because one is the historical aspect of it. He's been managing us for what, 3, 4 seasons now. At the end of the day, this is really the first true skid we've had since the beginning of his campaign. And so he's proven time and again the ability to right the ship. He's proven time and again the ability to create a consistent force within the dressing room and get the best out of players. I think we have definitely overlooked to a certain degree. The window has been discussed, but the injury issues are pretty insane. At one point, we had 7 injuries at the same time. We're still, and I don't know where everybody's arguments are, missing our best player, the player who we kind of rotate our entire attack and system around. And while Cess is deputized wonderfully, he's a very different player to Jedi who brings very, very different things to the table. I think we're still betting in signings. Yes, I think we do probably need to make some alterations in the system. I'm not going to say I'm a big fan of double pivot, but simultaneously, it's one of those things where I think tweaking is necessary, but if anyone's going to get us out from under this, it's absolutely Marco. You look at the managers who are out there. I don't know who's enthused by the prospect of somebody like a Brendan Rodgers, but for me, Marco has proven that every single time that he has gotten his back against the wall, the ability to fight out of it. And you listen to every single player whenever they come in, they talk about Marco's influence. You don't want to break that when they're all clearly behind him. So that's really where I see it holistically, but I'm sure Skibby has some, other incorrect opinions that he wants to contribute as well.
Wow, really sliding in those sort of aspirations on his character. Skibby, your opportunity to shine. Marco in or Marco out? Though I guess we have an idea of where you'd stand, but please elaborate.
So, for me, I'm leaning further towards Marco out. And there's a few things I want to sort of tackle here. I think debating in its essence is part of the American curriculum. So I'm already, he's got a leg up already. I mean, he looks like a person who went to debate club instead of, social gatherings and actual parties and actual friends. But there was a bit of a character assassination about voting and the vote that was in the Discord, and I may have rigged it. All I'm going to say is the things that I do with my VPN are between me and my ISP. So that's just put that out there. And I think, everyone can look at it as Marco out, and you can think about it as, he's probably not doing the best that he could, or, it's our first kind of bad moments, the first kind of time where, the back is against the wall for Marco. But for me, that's not really the case. I do agree that, injuries have really plagued. The last transfer window for me was not our best. Therefore, he hasn't been given the tools to succeed. But I think where it really comes down to is, one, his attitude, the way that he has held himself and, presented himself in the club in the public eye hasn't really sat well with me. He's been very arrogant. It's part of me, I was very, very much Team Marco start of this season, but the way that he's sort of conducted himself and held himself has just really left a bit of a sour taste in my mouth. And that's where I'm starting to think, is he the man to take us forward? And then I start to think about the times where, the seasons where we are pushing for Europe. And he's just really taken us to that 8th place. We're all fighting for 8th, like last year. We fall off in March. And, and now when you start to put that together of, between March and November, we actually have one of the worst records in the league. I think we sit 19th, obviously taking away from the sort of promoted clubs. But I think even Sunderland, given that they have played 10 games less than us since March, have more points than us. And I know they're a bit of an anomaly because of where they are in the table, but at the same time, the season doesn't just start for me in August. When you look at it between March and now, we actually are sitting in 19th, I believe, which is atrocious. And I think the only team that was lower than us is West Ham, I think, at the time. But I think it was around sort of 17 points in 17 games, which is not the best. But I think when it comes down to these injuries, the way that Marco has really kind of let me down in that sense is the way that he's used the players. He's used Muniz against Cambridge, completely a terrible decision, which has now caused him an injury, which now we've seen that he rushed him back and now he needs surgery. So that for me is just one of the most baffling decisions. But then it comes down to, Iwobi in the central position where he's played a majority of his career, but then suddenly, he comes out into the press and says, I'll play my player. Suddenly everyone thinks that they're a manager and a tactician, but, Iwobi apparently can play centrally and kind of laughed it off. And then the next game he plays him centrally and he plays one of the best games that he's ever played this season. So it's just, for me, it's just getting a bit mind-boggling. And, we'll probably go into a bit more detail, but I think it's just the way that he's holding himself with 6 months left on his contract as well, which is a huge red flag for me. And I know there's talks and things like that, but it just really gives me the essence of someone who potentially doesn't want to be here, someone who doesn't really want to be part of the strategic sort of Fulham, the strategy for Fulham going forward. Therefore, why would he be backed?
Great points. Great points. Like I said, I'm being beige, so that's pretty much all I can give in terms of my opinion. But Mike, anything you want to touch on what Skibby said about backing a manager that's maybe got 6 months left, and his communication style, his attitude?
Yeah, I think. Look, I don't disagree with you in the sense of, do I love how he acts on the touchline sometimes? Do I love how he acts in the press conferences every time? No, I do think that there's a little bit of petulance in there. That being said, first of all, this is clearly a negotiating tactic. He doesn't want to sign a contract without assurances that he's going to be backed. Candidly, he signed contracts before with assurances that he's going to get backed, and we back him with one player. But you look at other teams in a similar spot to us, they don't have windows like we do. They don't have investment like we do, where it comes on the last day, or yes, we break a transfer record, but it's on one player. It's something, it's somebody who needs to be proven. We don't buy proven articles. Every single time Marco has to develop something, which, by the way, if that's our model for the club, I think it's fantastic. I think we should just be more focused on that across the board. I think at the end of the day, you have to look at the face he's putting on as almost a foil to the Ali Max, the TKs of the world. And he's the one in there every single day. And the biggest leverage that he has is that contract and not signing the new agreement. Now we're coming up into this little Spider-Man meme kind of thing, or the Office meme, where everybody's pointing at each other. And at a certain point, we're at a bit of a standoff, and it's who's going to blink first. But when you're looking at it in the form of a negotiation, what other leverage does Marco have? Because if he signs a new contract, the club don't have to worry about this for a couple of years. They've proven this before. Skibby, you were talking about, there's really been no change since May to November. You're 100% right. But that's partially because the club is pretty much the same. We haven't brought in many new players. The ones that we have are either still getting up to speed or have been hurt or are 18 years old and don't necessarily have full control of their limbs yet. I'm going to give a small insight that I would be really curious to hear both of you about. I'm really interested in this academy striker. I think his name is, and I'm going to butcher the pronunciation, I apologize, Aaron Lupalo Bai. I'd love to see him on the bench for the Sunderland game because he's got confidence and he's going through. So I'd be really curious, but the fact that we're talking about an academy striker having essentially a Marcus Rashford type story as one of the potential options for what we're going to bring on shows that, yes, that window wasn't the best. Yes, we didn't have the resources that we need. Marco still got us out of the relegation zone. And when you look at the table, it's so clumped right now. Like, yes, we're 1 point off relegation, but I think we're only like 7 away from being in Europe, which, yes, it's 7 points, but you can outdo that. We've seen it before. Fulham have done that before, where they've taken on these huge win rates or these huge winning streaks. So I'd love to see that. But again, that's my perspective. I do think we're not going to find anyone better than Silva. And I'd be very concerned that we didn't plan well enough for right now to get somebody else in.
Very fair points. Skibby, any comments?
Yeah, and I think the one of the key ones you've mentioned there is the transfer windows. And I do agree that the transfer window just gone was not up to par. The business was too late. There was too much discussion around who we want. And I think that a lot of the grumblings from what we heard from within inside the club was that power struggle between Ali Mac and Marco Silva. But I also think that there also comes that point of between the leverage, like we talked about, which is I'm not signing a new contract until you buy the players that I want to work with. Well, we're not going to buy the players that you want to work with unless you sign a new contract. And I agree with the latter, personally, because you could spend, and I think on average, since Marco's been at Fulham, we've spent on average around 75 million per summer. We spent 40 million this summer just gone, and that was mostly on Kevin. So we actually halved what we normally invest. And I think that was due to Marco not committing and that going forward. But when you hear the grumblings of what was going on behind closed doors, where Marco wanted Sterling, Marco wanted Reece Nelson, questionable decisions, I think, especially from a Reece Nelson perspective, where he'd done both his hamstrings, was pretty much completely restructured. And we wanted to do, obviously, the loan with the option. Arsenal wanted to sell him straight outright. It just didn't fit what we wanted. And I do agree with the hierarchy there in that that was a great decision. I think they're now starting to move into a structure where, where Brighton are thriving, where Brentford have been thriving, which is buying the kind of, not unknowns, but potential high transfer fee for a young target, such as Kevin, who's potentially on lower wages, who we could potentially resell. Do Sterling, does Reece Nelson, do they really strike as people we could resell? Absolutely not. Especially Reece Nelson, giving his injury record as well, like I mentioned. But I just think for me, this squad is the same squad that we had at the end of last season. We've added Chukwueze, Kevin, Asukari, if you can really add him into that. But in my eyes, we lost Nelson. We lost Nelson, Willian. We've replaced him with two really, really good wingers. And I think that is not a bad place to be in. And I just think from that point on, we shouldn't be struggling in a way that we are, but we are because of the injuries. And I'm not going to take that away that, and I did see a lot of arguments which is around squad depth. We've got 24 players in this squad. What more depth do you want? We would have had to sell to bring in more players. Therefore, why are we giving another contract to Tom Kearney? Why have we still got Reed on the books? I mean, at this level, when you want to take that next step, you can't be sentimental about players. And unfortunately, that's where we've got to be ruthless. We've got to ditch Tom Kearney, ditch Reed, make Lukic the new sort of backup on the bench, and then you bring in a first team centre mid, for example. But you can't do that if you're holding on to these players. And I get that Marco loves his kind of structure. We can predict his starting 11 every time. And I think that is one of his downfalls, is that he doesn't like to mix it up. He waits too long to integrate new players into the starting 11, whereas most other clubs would sign a player like Kevin and they would throw him in from the get-go. Give him 45 minutes, give him an hour, and then sort of embed him that way, rather than just 10 minutes off the bench here and there, and then about 2 months later finally starting games. I just don't think that's the way forward. I know Marco is going to say, oh, they don't know how I play, they don't know this, but at this point, if we don't know how they play, neither does the opposition. Kevin could just bring his complete flair and just take on any kind of fullback, and they won't have any tapes on him. They won't know how to defend against him. And I just think that is a great asset to have when you bring in these new players. But we just take so long to embed them. And then the Kusiasare stuff, like I said, he is raw, but we haven't got another striker. And it's by putting Adama up there, he's basically like Bambi on ice, playing up top. He doesn't know what he's doing. So does this 18-year-old. But he knows where the goal is because I've seen it with my own eyes. So putting him up there, the centre-backs don't know how to defend against him. We don't know what to expect. And I just think from that perspective, and I will let Mike talk in a second, but with that key bit of information there, which is, if you were to throw in our only striking option, which just happens to be an 18-year-old from Bayern Munich, I don't think any fan will complain about Marco by having a bad game. It's just like we would just all shrug our shoulders and say, fair enough, he's not ready, but damn it, he's the best we've got at this moment. He's not even doing that. And the fact that he's overlooking him is just making me even more infuriated because he's just trying to prove a point. And I just think, just give the kid a run out, let him see what he can do. If he has a bad game, no one's going to hold it against him. But by just not picking him at all and trying to force Adama up there, or, I hear calls for like Harry Wilson as a false nine. I just think, just start the bloody striker. That's where I just get infuriated.
Yeah, start ALB.
Let me jump in real quick because we are veering into the next statement which you guys were going to debate, and then Mike, you're going to go first, so you'll have your say. But the next statement, under Silva's tenure, our transfer policy is good. Now, what does that mean? We're going to elaborate. Take into account the spend, the signings, the ability to resell, the value we're getting, and the timing of the signings, and anything else you want to add in response to Skibby's comments. Go ahead.
So, yeah, Skibby, I want to start this section with a question for you. We made 4 signings in the window. Who is the most impactful signing we've made so far this season?
Kevin.
I could not.
Oh, actually, no, the keeper. Sorry for
Benjamin
making all those saves.
I always forget about had the biggest impact of anyone we've signed, and you're laughing about that. And I asked that question for that exact reason. The reality is we made 4 signings in the window. 2 were loans, 1 was a negligible fee, and 1 was a big fee. You mentioned Brighton specifically. Brighton actually typically has a policy where they integrate players slowly over the first year. You look at when they brought in somebody like Caicedo, he actually didn't even play for the first 6 months. Like, that's just what they do, the way they integrate players. I don't think Marco's system is inherently wrong. And by the way, he tried to throw ESR in last season from the jump, and ESR clearly wasn't fit, clearly wasn't ready to go, clearly still isn't fit, still isn't ready to go. So I think there's something to be said for the way he integrates players. Whether we like it or not, he's seeing them every single day on the training ground. And there's a certain degree of, hey, did we actually integrate him the right way? I'd love to see more of Kevin, but simultaneously, I'd love to see more of Chukwueze too. There are injury concerns around them too. To answer Mark's actual question about our transfer business, it comes too late in the window. I don't think anyone disagrees with that. 3 out of our 4 signings literally came on the last day. I don't actually know if Kusiasari even came in on the last day. It might have been the day after because of paperwork. So that business is done way too late. When you look at the resale value, I think we do have some interesting players that we bring in. We just don't sell them because we don't bring in and develop the new crop beneath them and prepare for the future that way. We don't even replace the players that we had. We replaced Pereira with King, sort of, but not really. It almost feels like King has replaced more ESR, and we just didn't have anyone to replace Pereira. I think we've papered over a lot of cracks with the Polina and Mitrovic sales. I think we've made some pretty big mistakes, in my perspective, about selling players. We should have sold Tosin a year earlier. We knew there was an issue. In hindsight, say what you will about him now, how we didn't buy a winger like Manor Solomon for $7 million and then just immediately flip him is insane. Like, we like to take these really big swings on these key targets, which is great, but we don't place enough bets that we have that depth that you were talking about to do that. And I know you don't want to be sentimental about this, but you look at other clubs, they're able to do that balance. West Ham kept Kevin Nolan in the squad forever, in spite of the fact that he really wasn't a consistent player anymore. That Man United, and I know that's probably a different level of club, was able to slowly facilitate out the Rooneys, the Giggs of the world, and the Scholes of the world, and continue to bring in other players up and through. So other clubs are able to balance this. I think TC has a place in the squad. I don't think Harrison Reed does personally, but I do think TC has a place in the squad where he provides something different to other midfielders. But that's also an indictment on the squad as a whole, that we don't have a new kind of metronome midfielder that we can bring in to change the pace, to control the game, to advance the play. You said it before, Iwobi's probably done the best of anybody like that this season. So if I have to look at our business as a whole, look, some of the players we bring in are amazing, right? We bring in Polina, Andreas for, what was it, 8-10 million was great. Muniz has been great. I think part of it is we do the business too late. We don't double and triple down in positions, which we really should, to facilitate a pipeline. And also, I'll leave it on this. Up until recently, we were doing these sell-on clauses. Selling Muniz wouldn't have netted us all that much money because they had a sell, like Flamengo, I believe, has a sell-on clause of 20% of the value. And if you're selling him for 35 million, you bought him for 8, you'd think you're getting 32. The reality is you're getting closer to about 20. And that doesn't really work. Now it's percentage of sale, it looks like, which is a little bit better, but not doing that strategically is the reason we're not able to buy more new, exciting players. We're not able to triple down in the depth, is because we make those kinds of mistakes.
Am I jumping straight back in? Okay. Well, I mean, I get what you're saying, and I do agree to some extent. I mean, the only thing that I would say around the timing of the deal is we saw it with Andre, where we were being led along we were being strung along for so long, which was, oh yeah, we're going to sell him to you. We've agreed 23 million, but we just need him for the Copa Libertadores last 16. Okay, we're just going to keep him for the quarterfinal just to make sure that we get there. Oh, actually, now it's gone up to 30 million. That took 2 months of our window, and then we settled on Berger, who I think is still a very good player, but it's just one of those things. And I just think that was the same in a way with Kevin. So I mean, according to the people that I've spoken to, that deal was in progress for 2 months. So before we signed him, there was, will he, won't he? Oh, well, we want to get him for 30 million. They were holding out for 50. I think at this point, the reason that was done so late is because there was a bit more pressure from the players' side. I want to go play in the Premier League. It takes it right down to the wire. And then suddenly you go, suddenly he's available for 34 million. We saved nearly 15 million. I mean, not that we were ever going to pay 50 million, but we saved that money because time running out and pressure from the players. And I think that's something really key for Fulham. What you've got to remember is we are a Premier League team who have probably one of the smallest wage budgets in the league, probably one of the biggest PSR constraints because, well, we paid for the stand, which was included, I believe, 2 years ago. So the Mitrovic sale actually went towards PSR because the books were so unbalanced because of we were paying for the Riverside without any money coming in. So everyone asked where the Mitrovic money went, Riverside. Where did the Palhinha money go? ESR. But I think what the important thing is, because we're so unattractive as a Premier League team, players like Chukwueze, players like Kevin would not come to Fulham in July. They would wait to see if there's a top six or a European club who would potentially want their services and they want to play continental football. That's just how the world works. And I think there is a credit to Fulham's transfer targets and their strategy, which is we are over-egging ourselves. Like, okay, we look at Kevin and Chukwueze in the summer just gone. Smith Rowe took a hell of a lot of convincing. Anderson, I mean, I think he was able to go to Juventus at the time. There's also a lot of talk around that. I think it's just players like that who would never really give us a second look until, granted, Marco Silva has a chat with them and convinces them to come. So that is a very good asset for Marco to have. But I do think that if you want us to make transfers within the July, ready for pre-season, you're just not going to get those sort of caliber of players. You're going to get those squad players. I reckon you'll probably get, without being disrespectful, the Lukic of kind of quality player. Okay, he's all right, but he won't make it into a top 8 team who are playing in Europe. But, he'll be happy to come and play Premier League football. That's the kind of quality player that you get in July who can then be adapted into pre-season and ready for the season ahead. But once you start to go into the sort of end of the transfer window, when I think about Mitrovic back in the day, he was going to Anderlecht until Slav gave him a call, and then suddenly it all changes. Just players don't become available right at the end of the window, and they're the sort of players that unfortunately fit the bill. And the reason that the management aren't going to change their ways is because it's just worked previously so well. When you think about the players that we picked up in those sort of last week of the window, suddenly some very, very good players become available, and can take this team forward. And I think there are some quite good examples of that, where I think Reece Nelson, when he was actually fit, was a very good pickup on loan. And I think Sander Berger was kind of towards the end of the window, but again, for me, was kind of holding up his options. Where we would go. He knew he wouldn't stay at Burnley, but he becomes available. Granted, it was after the Andre deal fell through, but I think it's just those quality of players that come available at the end of the window is just the reason they do it, and that is basically a faultless strategy in the eyes of the management because they are getting such high caliber players.
But so I can't remember off the top of my head. We signed Palhinha on deadline day, right?
Palhinha.
We definitely did not.
Palhinha
we signed him in July,
one, I believe.
It was in July.
Yeah,
and yeah, I was asking that one a little bit rhetorically. And Calvin Bassey, right? He came in on deadline day too, right?
But no one would touch him.
But he came in on the last day of the window, right?
No one would touch him. He was
signed
seen as Ajax.
July,
He's not a high caliber player.
But signed in July, right?
Correct.
So we signed him in July. We signed João Palhinha in July. And this year in July, the squad player that we brought in was, again, the aforementioned Benjamin Lecomte. Like, we're really... that's a great argument if, A, we don't have our biggest signings actually coming in July in reality, the ones who are the most successful, and B, the fact that at the end of the day, we're not even signing any squad rotation players in July. And that's the problem when we look at our policy is that, hey, we're waiting so late that people make the argument of these players not getting integrated. There's a reason we don't see the majority of them hit until the next season or even the second half of the season. It's because they're not fit. They're not used to playing in the system. I've said this before. I love watching Kevin. I have no idea what our left side is going to look like with Kevin and Anthony Robinson bouncing up the wing. I don't know if that's even going to work together. Like, you might actually have to fundamentally rotate the team. Part of that you would actually know if we got these players in early, if you got to develop that rapport, if you got to develop that system, or even if you just had rotation players. Hayden Hackney should have been in from one of the first weeks. We should have just thrown an offer and said, hey, this is the deal. We are a Premier League club. And yes, we are stretched from a PSR perspective. That should be getting better because we're moving further and further away from our first promotion disaster. We sold Jay Stansfield, which no one likes to talk about anymore, as a PSR multiplier that we should have been able to leverage for something. I've just never fully understood, like, hey, why can't we get something in early? Like, there are players available, and look, at the end of the day, not all the windows are at the same time anyway, so other clubs have motivations to sell players too. So I would just love to see us do more early. Like, just don't do anything.
Yeah, and I think my kind of rebuttal on that one is we just need to, where it comes back to, stop being sentimental. If we sell TC, we're not getting a contract. If we sell Reed early in the window, suddenly that money frees up, and suddenly that competition also becomes very apparent. Of, if you come to Fulham, you'll be a starter / a rotational player. I think where we looked at the right back from Coventry in January, whose name I'm going to completely forget. Van Uwijk, that's it. He didn't want to join because he didn't want to be third choice. He didn't, and there was so there was just no clearance on whether Tete was going to sign a new contract. That was just all complete mishandled. And I think that's very key as well, because how we let Pereira go without any kind of person coming in, and I think that definitely is a miscommunication between management and the hierarchy, because it just baffles me that, I mean, love him or hate him, the impact that Pereira had on our team was quite substantial. Like the work rate that he added, the way that he was also seen as one of the leaders of in the dressing room. There was that Brazilian contingent, the Portuguese contingent, and Marco trusted him. I believe he was a captain in the FA Cup against Watford. So, he was respected by Marco. But for some reason, he let him go, but then he pulls the plug on Wilson to Leeds to bring in Tyreek George, which is actually showing as a massive clanger for me. Wilson, everyone's going to say that he had a great pre-season, but we just know that it's the same old story in the Premier League where he's just so hot and cold. And for me, he is a great person to bring off the bench. Tyreek George, could he have potentially been a starter on that right-hand side, on the left-hand side? Potentially. And he, being at 19, it also adds into that resale value. But for some reason, we decided to keep hold of, this aging, really hot and cold winger that we've had since the Championship, instead of some exciting new youngster who I reckon whose value is now doubled from the agreed fee that we had on deadline day. And for me, that was apparently pulled by Marco. There was talks of Adama leaving, also squashed by Marco. It's just, I know he likes to have these players that he can trust, but at the same time, if you want to go to that next level, which I know that everybody, including Marco, does, we just can't be hanging on to people just for the sake of it, just because they gave us a good run out when we finished 12th last season. We want to take that next step. And unfortunately, there have to be sacrifices made because we've got a squad of 24/25. And yet, people will talk about squad depth, like I talked about, but where are you going to add the players when you've got to register these players and we're already at our maximum?
I do think there is something to be said, though, for how much does selling Tom Kearney, well, first of all, we couldn't have sold Tom Kearney anyway. He wasn't on a contract. But how much does selling, there wasn't anything to release. He was out of contract.
But 65 grand a week. That's what you're releasing.
That opening that up is fair. And I don't know if it was actually 65 grand. I thought it was closer to like 50, but still. Point being, I don't know how much you're getting for selling a Harrison Reed and how much that actually impacts the window. I don't know how much that actually changes anything like that. If you want to make the argument of, hey, why didn't we sell Kenny Tete a year ago? He's injury prone. We bought him for a small amount, a small fee. It frees up probably one of the larger wage earners. I would understand that conversation. We seem to never use we seem to never use Timmy Chestnuts unless he actually is doing like unless Tete is hurt. He's not even our backup left back option. I don't know why we haven't sold him on. Like there are players that I think we could sell. I'm falling more and more to the camp that after this season we probably need to sell on Bassi if there's value and let Cuenca take that role. But at the end of the day, that's not our policy. We don't really sell our first teamers unless we get a Godfather offer because you look at Mitro, you look at Polina. We didn't sell them until we got the absolute what we thought was apex of their value, and the player said we're not going to play anymore. And meanwhile, we don't plan ahead. I think the best we've done is planning and just getting Bassi in for Tim Ream. And again, even Tim Ream, we just kind of let go. We didn't get anything for him. So you look at the policy, like if I'm the club right now, I have to think about, as much as I love Anthony Robinson, this is not the time to sell him. We should have sold him a year ago, probably. If I look at other players in the squad, I think after this season, we have to sell one of Berger or Lukic to reinvest in the squad. That just needs to be the case. I don't disagree with you on the Wilson piece, except for the fact that we would have been in an even worse situation now if we didn't have Wilson because we didn't back with additional wingers. We're waiting on essentially players who are Swiss Army knife players. We're looking at Iwobi to play 3 different positions. We're looking at Cess to play 3 different positions. We're looking at Bassi and Cuenca to both be the backup left backs for right now. This is a weird situation that, again, it's poor squad planning. How have we not, gotten another player to back up the Pereira position? I think Marco has said, had he known that we weren't going to have a new player coming in, he wouldn't have let Pereira go. But if we hadn't done that, we would have sold him for we wouldn't have gotten anything from him. He was in the last year of his contract too. We don't plan ahead. We don't think ahead in terms of selling these players. And then we say, hey, we don't have money to spend. That's exactly why we don't plan ahead. But it's not the players at the end of the bench, the ones we need to sell. It's the ones who are either reaching the apex of their value, or we have to sell the ones who are the qualified backups and bring in younger players that can supplement the team.
Very well
and we
said,
give
Mike.
Reed a 5-year contract.
Did we actually give Reed a new 5-year contract?
Alongside Robbo, he got it at the same time. That's right.
Okay, but that was a couple of years ago when Reed was actually still in the squad, at least.
Yeah,
Yes.
but that's the other end of the spectrum of the forward planning.
Yeah, exactly. But
We
again,
planned
that's
so
where you
well,
should
but
leverage.
fucking awfully.
But we should leverage that contract. The fact that he probably has another 2-3 years in that contract. How have we not thought about selling? There was a rumor every day that he was going to Burnley for a minute. Why didn't we just do that?
Very true. The third statement, which is a nice segue into this as well. Let's see if you agree, disagree, or what your thoughts are. The current management and ownership is good for the club. And clarification, I'm talking about the tenure of Shahid Khan, Tony Khan, and Alistair McIntosh. Skibby, if you want to take lead.
Yes. Personally, I think we could do a lot worse. I personally think that the job that Shahid has done has been very good, especially given where we were. A lot of people will, talk about when he took over, we got relegated. He was sold an absolute lemon. The club was not in a very good place. We had aging players when he took over. Basically, relegation was inevitable, and the previous owner, whose name I won't mention, got out at the right time. But for me, I think he's taken us in a strategic trajectory, which I think is very good for the club. It was clear that these regulations were coming in, that the clubs can only spend what they make, to stop people just having billionaires throw a couple of 100 million in and just be like, well, let's just throw in a bit more money and try and buy the league like Chelsea did under Abramovich, early 2000s. They're trying to prevent that from happening again. And I think for me, when you look from a business perspective, the Riverside stand was an outstanding and a much, much needed investment into the club. We managed to, increase the capacity, increase ticket sales, therefore have more businesses that are open non-match days, therefore revenues coming in all the time. So whether it's on a match day, non-match day, revenue is still coming into the club. And I think for that reason, I think that there has been some good moments for Shahid. I think, making his son the technical director, the director of football, the vice, he's got stupid titles. I think that is probably one of their worst decisions. I think when you have the money and the need to succeed, then put in a footballing brain, someone who's been in the game, someone who's been within the business for a while and knows how to run a club and knows what these the right strategic decisions, whether it be transfers, should be done. Not some guy who's playing wrestling and and all that kind of stuff. I think that was probably one of the worst decisions. But interestingly, when it comes to Ali Mack, I don't agree with his footballing decisions. From a footballing supporter's brain, I don't agree with what he's done at the club, ticket sales, and the way that he holds himself. Again, it's that demeanor aspect. But from somebody who is assessing from a business perspective, he's doing a good job. And what I mean by that is the CEO of a company is probably given some targets around increase EBIT, earnings before tax, reduce costs, and increase our revenue over 5 years. Well, how do we increase revenue? Well, we just put our ticket prices double the price, and some idiot will buy it, and they did. Therefore, tick in the box for one of his KPIs. Oh, well, we need to reduce costs. Okay, well, we're going to have to, sort of sell on players who are on high wages. So, there was aspects on this summer just gone where the club didn't tell Marco that Tete was leaving on a free. Tick on the box, try to undermine Silva there. Pereira was probably on a decent wage. Tick in the box by getting him off the books. And I think that's where we saw an absolute fall down in our transfer policy this summer, is just the CEO trying to meet his KPIs, which from his aspect and from an ownership perspective, he is meeting. He's increasing the revenue. He is making us more profitable on match days and non-match days. That's just what he's paid to do. And he's going to get a big fat bonus because he's doing it, but from a business perspective, not a football fan's perspective. And that's why we don't like him.
Okay, so it's really interesting, and there's a lot of things that you put in. I think no one can, to start, I don't think anyone can say that Shahid does not invest in the club at some level. I think, as you said, Skibby, there's a level of the devil you know versus the devil you don't, and there's never going to be a perfect owner. He has not starved the club. He has made sure that he's written off the debts. I'm not going to say that he's made the club, quote unquote, sustainable the way that he's wanted to say that he has, but simultaneously, he's made sure that we have not gotten ourselves into any trouble. And if and when the club is ever sold, I don't think we really need to worry about, this horrible downfall and collapse of Fulham FC. Like that is something that is very clear. So in terms of being a caretaker or a steward of the club, I think Shahid has done actually probably an unsung job of doing that. I think Tony, when engaged, actually seems to be okay. Now, the problem is, how often is he engaged? How often is he playing wrestling or focusing on the NFL? That's a question. But again, if that keeps us with a strong owner, I'm almost willing to write that off, so long as he's willing to work with with Tony specific. If Tony is willing to work with Marco specifically. So I think that's an interesting path to go down. I'm not going to say it's perfect. Obviously, again, we've debated the transfers. We've debated the timing of them. We've all seen Tony's public persona, and that's not anything anyone wants to say, like, yes, that's the representative of my club. That being said, the Ali Mack one, and again, I'm probably the person who's impacted the least on this on the call. But what I will say is everything you just outlined, Skibby, is essentially a private equity playbook. Private equity firms really are focused on maximizing the value of the club by reducing the top line, reducing the top line in order to get a higher bottom line. And that's raising prices, that's cutting resources. And that's one way to actually increase the value of something. But if you look at the venture capital world, for example, You invest, you spend money, you grow market share, and that also is a way to kind of grow the club specifically. And I was talking to somebody about this before, but I'm pretty disappointed. And I know some of this decision is based on Marco, but as an American, and Fulham having this illustrious American history, as we did for Full America Day, how have we not tried to penetrate the US market further? Like we just haven't done that. We have not tried to expand into any other markets. I would have to ask you all, but if I was to say that Fulham is the fifth most supported team in London, I think that's up for debate if it's that high. The fact that the brand has not been advanced, the fact that we don't have these marquee players that we've pushed on, the fact that we are not expanding our brand internationally, which are ways to bring in additional revenue and not just having tourists stop by the cottage because, hey, it's a Premier League club and we can get a ticket. It is a real shame. Not improving the atmosphere at the club to make sure that, hey, across the board, people are having a better experience. They want to come back. They want to spend money. They want to be supporters. They want to hit the gift shop. We don't do that. And so when we're talking about KPIs, we're fundamentally focused on that. First of all, we're speculating on what the actual KPIs are for Ally.
Yeah.
But also, if we're actually thinking through this, like, are we doing this in a way that actually provides the most value to the club, or are we doing things that are kind of short-term haircuts? And if so, how long is that really sustainable when you cut? I actually think, I don't know if this goes to Ali Mack. I don't know if this goes to Tony Khan. I don't know if this goes to Shad Khan or maybe somebody totally different. But the mentality of how we've actually grown the club and the club's presence, I think, has actually really hindered us, because it shouldn't take that much to talk Kevin to going from Ukraine to the Premier League. It shouldn't take us 2 months to do that. We got other players in really, really quickly without continental football. We're a London-based Premier League club in a nice area who are paying players. This should be an easy sell, but our brand recognition makes us a smaller club in a very, very big pot.
The one thing I would just quickly add is the reason why Kevin took 2 months is because our necessity to penny pinch. We had a massive success with Leno, £8 million. I think only 4 of that was paid by some metrics that he met like 2 seasons later. So a £4 million player, and we had that massive success. Therefore, like, holy shit, guys, that was really good. Let's do that. Let's keep doing that. And that's where it just comes to is clubs will come back to us and just say, well, we want X, and you're like, well, we got Leno for 8 million, so we can do this, and we can stand here all day, and we'll just get what we want. It's just that arrogance for me. That's all that comes down to.
Yeah, very fair points by both, and I wouldn't mind if we definitely did business earlier. Sometimes you got to pay the ask, but it is what it is. The final statement up for debate, should be a fun one, a little bit spicy. Influenced by my good mate who's a Palace fan and listens to his Palace mates talk about, their various successes more so recently. But the statement is as follows, with Mike to start. Fulham fans should be satisfied where we are. And where we are, in the context of this question, is sometimes upper mid-table, sometimes lower mid-table, and a decent cup run.
That's really a tough statement. I hate the word satisfied, personally. I think we should be happy about where we are. I think we're in a really, really good spot. And I think if you ask the majority of clubs, they would break your hand off for the position that we're in. I even think about a few years ago, and being a yo-yo club was absolutely awful. I mean, trying to get game rights to watch us in the championship in the US was impossible. Thank you to every VPN provider out there. Please don't sponsor me personally, but you can obviously find me on X. That being said, I think we should be pushing on higher. And again, the brand recognition thing, the ability to recruit players, the desire to be ambitious, is something I always want to see in the club. But I want to see us in the Premier League every single season. I don't necessarily want to be Palace. That last year was the first time in 10 years that they exceeded 50 points. But simultaneously, like, I want us to be pushing. And I want us to take swings on players, provided we're able to stay in the Prem. And I want us to go on a cup run, because you do dream, you do believe, you see what can happen. Fulham Boston, actually, just the genesis of it was the second round of the Carabao Cup semi-final against Liverpool a few years ago. That's where we started, is because of the magic of things like the cup, that people wanted to go meet up and watch the match and see something potentially historic. So I think there's pieces of that statement where I agree. Like, yeah, I like where we're at right now, but I don't want to be here forever. Like, I want us to try to push on. And some seasons are going to be better. Sometimes we are going to finish maybe seventh, eighth, maybe one day even sixth. But maybe we have a Leicester type run at some point. And sometimes we're going to finish 15th, 16th, 17th. That's okay. Like, but I want to see us take swings. I want to see us stay in the Prem, but I want to see us take swings to at least advance ourselves.
Very fair point. Skibby, go ahead.
Yeah, I think it all comes down to the points I made earlier around the way that we finish our seasons. And I think between August and March, under Marco, we have been on the right path. Yes, we've been hindered by, big players leaving, with Palhinha and Mitrovic, who were instrumental to that. But at the same time, we've managed to kind of push through and pick ourselves up and restructure ourselves in a way that we can still be competitive. I think where our fall down is really that between March and May. And for some reason, it happens every year under Marco, and I don't know why. We seem to have a decent squad that for the first half of the season really competes and allows us to really start dreaming of Europe. And then we just absolutely fall off, whether it's fatigue, but at the same time, I don't know whether I want us to push into Europe, because if we're just picking up fatigue from cup runs and league runs, then Europe would absolutely cripple us and we would get relegated. So I think for me, I am happy where we are, and I do think that we're in a good place. But at the same time, I just feel like the way that we are structured at this time, and whether it is Marco that is causing us a problem in terms of those drop-offs, I don't think I am fully satisfied, because I think I've seen a glimpse of where we should be in terms of that breaking that top 8. But do I think that we can break the top 8 in the way that we kind of held ourselves, and with how Marco takes the club from Marco to May? I just don't think so. I just think he's found his level, if I'm honest. And I think that level is, always the bridesmaid, never the bride type deal. And that's why I'm actually surprised when Marco gets linked to these big jobs, because they won't be as patient with him as we've been. So I think I am somewhat satisfied, but at the same time, I don't think we can go any further in our current structure.
Skibby, let me ask you a question. So,
go ahead.
Hypothetically, if the season ends and we finish somewhere between where we are now, this kind of 15th to 17th range, we're in the relegation fight, but we're never actually in the relegation zone. And we get to, I don't know, let's say a cup semifinal in Carabao. How do you feel about that season?
Not a good season.
Not a good season. If we make it to the cup final, is it a good season?
Somewhat. If we win it, then suddenly it's a good season. But I think,
if we win it, it's an amazing season, right?
Yeah, exactly. But I think the final for me, you look, and this is going to be really pessimistic, but you look at how we've reached the quarterfinal of the Carabao Cup thus far. I know we went to penalties, but it hasn't been challenging.
Sure.
Therefore, I think it's just quite easy for us. It's quite easy to get to the quarter/semis of a Carabao Cup.
I also think that we can lose to Oldham pretty early on and feel like idiots.
Potentially, but I just think, for me, what would be seen as a good season is their decent cup run, but also a consistency in the league where we don't have drop-offs in like the end of the season. If we can be consistent, or even have those blips periodically rather than a complete fall off at the end of the season, I would consider that a success, because all teams have bad episodes, bad weeks. Therefore, to go 2 games, 3 games where it hasn't gone your way, but filtered out and consistently across the season, fair enough. I would say that's better. But the fact that we seem to be really amazing, and then come February, March, we just fatigue and just fall off. I just think that just seems to be either poor man management or just, I guess, poor tactical decisions potentially. Like, or is it fatigue? I mean, there are so many questions and so many variables that could cause that. But at the same time, if we were to do it over a season, periodically, I would see that as a greater success than, every time we get to March, we just fall off. Because I just think that there's something completely wrong with the team at that point.
I do think there's an issue with the man management aspect of things. And we've seen other coaches have issues with this. Marcelo Bielsa is famous for the fact that he keeps a really, really small squad that he trusts and kind of pushes them through. The reason I was asking the question, though, is I was kind of trying to figure out, like, how do we gauge success as a club, right? If I could tell you, hey, we'll finish in 10th place, you will never lose more than 2 games in a row, but you're going to get knocked out in the quarterfinals or the round before that in both competitions. I'm curious.
I would take that as a success.
You would take that as a success more than having a really good cup run and being kind of lower to middle of the league, middle to lower of the league.
I would rather we focused on the league.
Okay. That's totally fair. As I said, I think one of the things we do have to think about, and we talk about this drop off, we talk about, like, what are the expectations and the ambitions of the club, is I think we've all established in this conversation that, look, we don't have the depth to necessarily fight every battle on every front, because at the end of the day, we are going to run out of steam, whether that's a Marco issue, a squad issue, whatever. The reality of the situation is that happens every single time, which means to a certain extent, we do have to pick our battles. And we've heard Marco talk specifically about how he wants to have these cup runs. I do think that probably ends up killing us at the end of the season when we've been, in the quarters, semis of the Carabao, and then we try to do the quarters of the FA Cup and plus the league, and Marco doesn't rotate or doesn't have the people to rotate. That's where we run into problems. And I think that, again, in terms of your comment on, am I satisfied? Not 100%. Like, I think that's part of it, is we need to be aligned on where we're actually going to focus our resources.
Great answers, guys. No, I appreciate it. All right, now time for some questions, because we are approaching the hour mark, but just a few ones that we got on the Discord. I'll just be firing them off. First one is for Mike, from Jimmy D. He asks, Fulham have been struggling in front of goal this season, and we're not converting possession into meaningful chances. Do we have an issue with our attacking structure under Silva?
I think we can definitely be a bit of a blunt instrument where every issue is a nail and all we have is a hammer, and that hammer is to cross the ball in every single time. And we don't even have Jedi to blame for crossing this season. You even see Kevin starting to just, clip in these crosses every single time. And there's no one there sometimes. I think back to the last match, and I think the best opportunity we had against Everton in reality was a ball into Cess, and Cess tries to cross it in inside the 6, and Raul is nowhere there. And that's a huge problem, is we have not yet seen the player that can break things off of the wing and beat 2 guys and get a shot. We've seen that Kevin and Chukwueze both have the ability to at least beat the man, but we haven't seen them finish yet. And I think especially as we're going to be without Muniz for a while, that Raul is clearly not fit, that Kusesare is not favored, and we may be playing a Chukwueze, a Wilson, and a Dama, a Josh King at the top. We need to have contribution from the wing. I mean, when we were looking at profiles of players in the off season, I think one of the things we required was players who could score off the wing. So now we're really going to be tested on that, and we don't right now have Iwobi, who's in a position where he might score 9 goals this season. We need those contributions to be coming from other places, where they cannot just be satisfied with, hey, we're going to play the hot-handed striker, and by the way, at some point that combination is going to come out to a 20-goal striker. That's not feasible or realistic at this point.
Yeah, completely agree. The next one from Jungle Whites for Skibby writes, who really runs recruitment, aka player choice? because I can't believe it's Tony Khan. Feels like we're really behind the likes of Bournemouth and Brighton.
Yeah, and I think this is where it comes down to where we've had failings in the past, which was our manager wasn't involved in transfer dealings. You know, Slav talked about it, Parker talked about it. For some reason, there seems to be some kind of, well, some magic moment where Marco has convinced the board and so that he is the man to be involved with transfer dealings. And I can understand that, and you see that with, you know, ESR being a definite Marco purchase, Iwobi definite Marco purchase, given sort of who he worked with at Everton. But I think where we're seeing the problems now, which is where the board are looking to go into that they want to kind of recreate what Bournemouth and Brighton are doing, but at the same time, Marco is wanting the Premier League experience. You know, he doesn't really like younger players, and I think that's where we're now seeing that struggle, because they're not coming to an agreement. We're then going to see sort of later deals, just because these deals aren't going to wait around, and these players aren't going to wait around for our hierarchy to agree. I do think we are falling behind. I think, you know, Bournemouth and Brighton are already settled in terms of their strategy and it works. We can try and copy that, but at the same time, it's going to take us a long time for us to actually understand how that model works, how we can incorporate it into our kind of legacy model, and also trying to keep our manager happy at the same time, who doesn't want players who, you know, potentially are resaleable. He just wants players that he knows that can fit his system and will probably stick around, to be honest, and not be sold on. You're on mute, bro.
Thank you for that. That was a corporate moment. Yes, I just was giving some basic platitudes, saying I agree, and I like I said, I'm going to be very beige. I'm not going to sort of try and influence the discussion, but one thing I will say is I wish we were better at selling, but I'll leave it at that. Second to last question from Spanish FFC Ultras for Mike is: are the Khans negotiating with Silva or in contact with his replacements?
I have to believe that they're negotiating with them. I just, first of all, our history as a club has not shown that they are negotiating with a replacement. We don't have that level of foresight or forethought. So I take that off the table. I think what they're probably trying to do right now is trying to figure out a system that will work for everybody. Where I think we've heard kind of rumors and rumblings that Marco wants a longer contract with a release clause, and the Cons don't want to include that release clause, but want to give him, a shorter contract to give him that flexibility. I've posited this, and again, it will never happen. But I would love to see some kind of level of a negotiation where that we give Silva a 2-year contract, essentially, where we will, with certain stipulations in place, allow him to structure a season of windows how he wants. Bring in the players you want. Here's the budget that you have to spend. Obviously, you can't like sell on Josh King for 2 million because that will bankrupt the club in the long run. But within kind of a certain guideline, let Marco have 1 year of whatever he wants. Let's see what that project looks like. Like I want the Snyder cut in this case. So let's see what that actually looks like. If we finish above a certain place in the table, let's say ninth or 10th, Marco gets the contract that he wants and the backing and continues to get the backing he wants. And if not, the Cons either have the option to accept the second year of the contract, Marco can walk, or we bring in a new replacement. Obviously, I don't think that's feasible to happen, but I think you have to realize, if you're the Cons perspective, that this isn't, you look at the managers that are out there and who are we really going to grab? And again, Marco came out of nowhere last time, and I'll be honest, I was critical about it last time. That's not the manager I wanted. And by the way, had we picked the manager I wanted, we would have Yeri Ishmael at the club, who would have failed out almost immediately, and we would probably still be in the championship, if not lower. So I think it's one of those things where the club has a certain amount of confidence that they can get a replacement given time, but I don't know how confident they feel about doing that right now. And therefore, I think they're trying to figure out a way to either maintain the status quo of right now or figure out how they can extend this process going forward.
Great points. I'd love to see it as well, but I think that's far too much hands off, risk on from the Khans to give Silva full say, even for a year, of the
It's
players.
not that it's not like he's earned it with any level of credit in the bank or anything.
Yeah, very true. Last question for Skibby from Gary Costello. He goes, how do we get out of this position, and who do we trust more to make it possible, Marco or the Khans?
Wow. Do you know what? The person I trust to get us out of this position is a Marco committed to the club. And, and I think there are elements of what Mike said, which is, give him the contract he wants, but with certain criteria that he has to meet. Therefore, suddenly he's quids in. And I think, this kind of brings me to kind of the real kind of closing argument of the debate, which is I don't really want Marco of old to leave the club. However, I don't want the current Marco, who's petulant and complaining all the time and making weird decisions with 6 months left on his contract, to steer us in a way that he's currently steering us, because I just think that that's no good for either party, because he's going to be seen as a bit of a failure and get sacked. And if Fulham get relegated, then obviously that's a black mark on his record. But I mean, the Khans previously have made some, I would say, good decisions when it comes to managers. I think Marco being a good exhibit, a good example, as well as I would say that, Slav in the Championship was a good fit. So I think we've potentially learned from our mistakes. We've actually made some good, potentially, Parker at the time, was he a good fit? Debatable. Everyone will say he got us promoted, but at the same time it was absolutely boring. But I do think that the Khans do learn, and we have seen that evidence of that in the past. But I just think, for me, if Marco doesn't sign a new contract, then that's why he should be. That's why I think that he should leave. We should get someone in on a longer deal who is committed to the cause and part of those strategic decisions going forward. And there are some managers out there. Marco Rose. I'm probably going to say his name wrong, but Marco Rose. There's some kind of accent on the E. He was at Dortmund. He was at Leipzig. He's been there. He's played Champions League. He is a decent level manager. Therefore, is he the man to come in and potentially on a not long-term contract, but obviously longer than 6 months, and turn the ship around? I would say that we would potentially bring in another face, and someone who is committed to the cause, and obviously, because we have the Arsenal there to get us out of this position. I think there has been very unlucky to be in a position we're in, and like Mike said earlier, we're only 1 point off the relegation zone, but at the same time we're only like 1 point off Newcastle, so they're in 14th, 13th. So is it really that catastrophic? Probably not. But at the same time, I just feel like you either commit or you leave, and that's where I stand. And I think that kind of, without being an absolute dick about it, Gary, that's kind of where I am. It could be both of them. It could be the Khans in a way that, okay, fair enough, if you're not going to commit, then off you go. But if you are going to commit, then Marco is the way to take us forward.
So what I'm hearing, by the way, Skibby, is that you are all in for a 3-year contract for Claudio Ranieri.
Yeah, or Magat's probably around. But
very good.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks so much for joining us, everyone. That was pretty good. It was pretty interesting. We got to sort of air out our thoughts, discuss a few things, mostly the hot topics that a lot of other elements of the fan base have sort of found interesting and touched on. I want to say a big thank you to Mike for giving us liberty, freedom, democracy, and East Coast candor. Thank you so much for getting up this morning and joining us.
Hell yeah.
And Skibby, appreciate your thoughts, and it's always good hearing, everything, all your opinions. I'm kind of rambling on now, but thanks for being here is my point.
Well, you don't like my democracy?
Your democracy is great.
Stuffing ballot boxes is not democracy.
All right. And with that, I'll see us off with a you white.